Now we are going to discuss head injury, and in head injury, first we will discuss the layers of scalp. So see what are the layers of scalp. So here you can see what are the layers. First is skin. Just below the skin there is connective tissue, then there is aponeurosis, there is loose areolar tissue, and there is pericranium, right? So how to remember? It's very easy. These are the layers of scalp, and the mnemonic is also scalp. Clear? So here you can see skin, connective tissue, aponeurosis, loose areolar tissue, and pericranium. These are the layers. Now one by one we are going to discuss the important points related to the layers. Now see, first is the skin. So the skin is having numerous hair follicles and sebaceous gland. So the skin is having numerous hair follicles and sebaceous gland. Clear? Now see what is the application. So since the skin is very rich and it is having numerous hair follicles and sebaceous gland, scalp is the most common site of sebaceous cyst. So first very important point, that scalp is the most common site of sebaceous cyst. Okay, now see the connective tissue. This is very important. If you see this connective tissue layer, here you can notice that there is yellow colored nerves. So you can see, so there is rich innervation. Simultaneously what you can see, red colored arteries and blue colored veins. So in this connective tissue there is rich innervation. What kind of connective tissue is there in the scalp? It is dense connective tissue. What kind of connective tissue? Dense connective tissue. And in this connective tissue there is rich innervation and there is rich vascularity. Clear? But what is the problem? There is dense connective tissue, and in this particular layer the blood vessels are densely adherent to the connective tissue. And if blood vessels are densely adherent to the connective tissue, if there is any laceration, what the blood vessels are not able to constrict. And if blood vessels are not able to constrict, what will happen? You have noticed that in scalp laceration there is profuse bleeding. So this is the problem. So here the main problem, here the blood vessels, these are densely adherent. So these are densely adherent to connective tissue. And because of that, what's the problem? It's not able to constrict. So these blood vessels are not able to constrict. Okay, and that's why in cases of laceration, what happens? There is profuse bleeding. So this question was asked indirectly, that whenever there is scalp laceration, how you are going to proceed, how you are going to control the bleeding. So first we have to apply the pressure. So first, direct pressure. Second, we have to suture it in 2 layers, and see the wound edges should be everted, right? So whenever there is profuse bleeding, how we are going to control it? So first, apply direct pressure. We are going to suture it in 2 layers. So suture in 2 layers, right? And whenever we are going to suture, there should be eversion of edges of wound. So there should be eversion of wound edges. Clear? Now again see the diagram. So if you see this diagram again, what you are going to notice, that there is emissory vein. Clear? And what is the location of this emissory vein? These emissory veins are mainly located in which particular layer? These are located in loose areolar tissue, in this layer. Clear? So these emissory veins, these are located in loose areolar tissue layer, mainly loose areolar tissue layer. Clear? So these are the important points related to the layers of scalp. Now we are going to discuss skull fractures. Skull fractures. Okay. Skull fractures are of two types. One is closed and second is open, also known as compound fractures. So what is the closed fracture? In closed fracture, the overlying skin is intact, and in open or compound fracture, the overlying skin is disrupted. Okay, so see the types. Skull fracture is of two types. First, closed fracture, and the second is open, also known as compound skull fracture. Compound skull fracture. Now see here, in closed skull fracture, the overlying skin, it's intact here. So this is intact in closed and this is disrupted. Clear? So since overlying skin is intact here, generally no treatment is required if patient is having closed skull fracture, right? So how we are going to manage here? The management, no specific treatment is required. Clear? So what happens in cases of open or compound fracture where overlying skin is disrupted? What? We have to close overlying skin and perform the operative debridement. Clear? So what's the treatment here? Here we are going to close the skin, means repair of scalp, and we have to go for operative debridement. Operative debridement. Clear? In open or compound fracture, craniotomy is not required in all cases. So question is asked, in which cases craniotomy is required? Now see, whenever there is depression more than the cranial thickness, so if the depression is more than the cranial thickness, if the patient is having intracranial hematoma, or there is involvement of this sinus, which one? Frontal sinus. So in these cases we go for craniotomy. So what are the indications of craniotomy? Indications of craniotomy. So first is, whenever the depression is more than cranial thickness, depression, it's more than cranial thickness. Second, patient is having intracranial hematoma. So intracranial hematoma, and if there is involvement of which sinus? If there is involvement of frontal sinus, right? So frontal sinus involvement. These are the indications of craniotomy. Now see this image. This was an image based question asked in AIIMS. So what kind of fracture is there? Can you see here? Here the fragment of bone is pressed towards the brain. Can you see? The fragment of bone is pressed towards the brain, and this is known as depressed skull fracture. So what's the name? It is depressed skull fracture. So what happens in depressed skull fracture? Here the fragment of bone is pressed towards the brain, right? Now see this image. In this image you can make out that there is outer cortex of depressed skull fracture and there is inner cortex. So this one is outer cortex, and here this one is inner cortex. Clear? Outer cortex and inner cortex. Now the problem, the inner cortex is having multiple sharp ends, and if the inner cortex is having multiple sharp ends, these multiple sharp ends are going to cause the injury of what? Dura, brain and blood vessels. So the problem, because of these sharp ends, this inner cortex is having multiple sharp ends, right? So because of these multiple sharp ends, what's the problem? It's going to cause injury of first dura, it can injure brain, and third, it can injure the blood vessel. So So in patients who are having depressed skull fracture, we have to perform craniotomy. Why? Here the bone is pressed towards the brain. That's why we have to elevate the fracture. Second, since there is dural laceration, so we have to repair the dural laceration. And third, blood vessel is injured, so there is bleeding, so we have to control the hemostasis. So why we perform craniotomy? So in depressed skull fracture, the treatment is craniotomy. And it's very easy to remember why we perform craniotomy, because it is depressed fracture, so we have to elevate the fracture. So why? Because we want to elevate the fracture. Elevate the fracture. Second, there is injury to dura, there is dural laceration, so to repair dural laceration. And since there is injury to blood vessels, what we have to do? We have to obtain hemostasis. Obtain hemostasis. Now we are going to discuss skull base fracture, and these fractures are frequently asked in exam. Skull base fractures. Okay, so skull base fracture include anterior cranial fossa fracture, middle cranial fossa fracture, and posterior cranial fossa fracture, right? So first see the anatomy. If you see the posterior fossa, this posterior cranial fossa is mainly formed by which bone? This is occipital bone. It is mainly formed by occipital bone. And if you see this middle cranial fossa, it is formed by temporal bone. Temporal bone. And here you can see sphenoid bone. So mainly temporal bone. Formed by temporal bone and sphenoid bone, but mainly temporal bone. And here you can see this anterior cranial fossa. This is mainly formed by the frontal bone. Frontal bone. Okay. So one basic question is there. If the posterior cranial fossa is mainly formed by occipital bone, there will be contusion of which particular lobe? So there will be contusion of occipital lobe. In middle cranial fossa, since it is formed by the temporal bone, there will be contusion of which lobe? Temporal lobe. And in anterior cranial fossa, since it is formed by frontal bone, there is contusion of which lobe? Frontal lobe. So one point is clear. In anterior cranial fossa fracture, there is contusion of frontal lobe. In middle cranial fossa fracture, there is contusion of temporal lobe. And in posterior fossa, there is contusion of occipital lobe. One point. Now see, here if you notice, this is the jugular foramen. What's the name of this foramen? This is jugular foramen. The posterior part of jugular foramen is formed by occipital bone. Now the problem, via this jugular foramen, three nerves are going to pass: 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerve. So if there is fracture of occipital bone, there can be paresis of these three nerves, and this is known as jugular foramen syndrome. The other name of this condition is Wernicke syndrome, right? So in posterior cranial fossa fracture, there can be jugular foramen syndrome. It is also known as Wernicke syndrome. Wernicke syndrome. And there is paresis of which nerves? 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerves, because these are the nerves which are going to pass via the jugular foramen. Okay. Second problem. Generally in middle cranial fossa fracture, there is fracture of petrous part of temporal bone, right? So whenever there is fracture of this petrous part of temporal bone, there is dural laceration. Because of this dural laceration, there is CSF leaks. So leakage of CSF. If the tympanic membrane is ruptured, the CSF comes out via ear, and this is known as otorrhea. And if tympanic membrane is intact, this CSF comes out via nose, that is known as otorhinorrhea or paradoxical otorrhea. Okay. So what's the problem? Here, because of fracture of petrous part of temporal bone, these patients can have otorrhea or otorhinorrhea. Clear? Now see, in frontal lobe, if you see, this is the cribriform plate, right? So what is this cribriform plate? cribriform plate is a sieve-like structure. Okay, so cribriform plate is a sieve-like structure. It's located between anterior cranial fossa and nose. So what is the problem? Whenever there is fracture of this cribriform plate, what happens? There is leakage of CSF and the CSF is coming out via nose. This is known as rhinorrhea. So whenever there is fracture, if there is fracture of cribriform plate, there can be rhinorrhea. Clear? So these are the basic points. Now coming to the incidence. If you see the incidence, the anterior cranial fossa fracture 70%. If you see the combined middle cranial fossa fracture, it is 20 plus 5. So it varies from 20 to 25%. And if you see the posterior cranial fossa fracture, it is 5%. Right? So the most common is in skull base fracture. What's the most common type? Anterior cranial fossa, followed by middle cranial fossa fracture, followed by posterior cranial fossa fracture. Right? So anterior cranial fossa fracture incidence 70%, middle cranial fossa fracture combined incidence 20 to 25, and posterior cranial fossa fracture is 5%. This is very important topic, almost asked every year. So individually we are going to discuss. So first of all, anterior cranial fossa fracture. So anterior cranial fossa is mainly formed by which bone? It is mainly formed by frontal bone. Because of this, there is contusion in which lobe? There is frontal lobe contusion. Clear? Second point, in these patients, there is epistaxis. There is subconjunctival hematoma. Okay, we discussed that there is cribriform plate and there is fracture of cribriform plate, which is a sieve-like structure. Because of that fracture, what happens? CSF leaks through nose, and this is known as what? CSF rhinorrhea. So the problem, patient is having CSF rhinorrhea. Okay. See, sometimes the head injury patients are brought to your emergency, okay, and they have nasal secretions. If they have nasal secretions, you don't know whether this is secretion or this is CSF. So how will you differentiate? So we are going to collect the secretions on a tissue paper, and if you are going to collect the secretions on tissue paper, what happens? So if you collect the secretions on tissue paper, you will notice that centrally there will be blood and the CSF spreads rapidly outwards. So what you are going to notice, this kind of sign, and this is known as target sign, also known as halo sign, also known as double ring sign. Okay, so collect the secretions on tissue paper and this sign is there. It's known as target sign. It is also known as halo sign. And can you see how many rings are there? Here you notice this is internal and this is external. Clear? So how many rings? Double, 2 rings are there. So double ring sign. By the way, what is the gold standard or confirmatory test for CSF detection? It is the beta 2 transferrin assay. Okay, so what is the gold standard or confirmatory test? And that's beta 2 transferrin assay. All these are important questions. Clear? So this was CSF rhinorrhea. These patients have anosmia, and these patients have periorbital hematoma, and this periorbital hematoma is also known as black eye, also known as raccoon eyes. So there is periorbital hematoma. So see how this periorbital hematoma looks like. This is also known as black eye and this is also known as raccoon eyes. So the other name is black eye, raccoon eyes or periorbital ecchymosis. Clear? So these are the clinical manifestations of anterior cranial fossa fracture. So how to remember? It's very easy to remember by a mnemonic, and the mnemonic is frontal escape. The mnemonic is frontal escape. Clear? So can you see here, this is frontal lobe contusion. So frontal, E means epistaxis, S means subconjunctival hematoma, C means CSF rhinorrhea, A means anosmia, and PE means periorbital hematoma, which is also known as black eye or raccoon eyes. Now second important is middle cranial fossa fracture. Okay, so we discussed that this middle cranial fossa is mainly formed by temporal bone. It is mainly formed by temporal bone, and that's why which contusion is seen because of fracture of Peters part of temporal bone. You will notice that there is temporal lobe contusion. Clear? One. Second, whenever there is fracture of Peters part of temporal bone, it is going to lacerate the dura, and because of this dural laceration, if tympanic membrane is perforated, CSF is coming out via ear. This is known as CSF otorrhea, and if it is intact, the CSF comes out via nose. This is known as otorhinorrhea, also known as paradoxical rhinorrhea. So now see the clinical manifestation. Here there is fracture of Peters part of temporal bone. Clear? And because of fracture, there is dural laceration. Dural laceration. Okay. Now there are two possibilities. If tympanic membrane is perforated, and the second is it's intact. If it's perforated, CSF comes out via ear, and this is known as CSF otorrhea. So this is CSF otorrhea. And if it's intact, CSF comes out via nose. This is known as otorhinorrhea, also known as paradoxical rhinorrhea. So the other name is otorhinorrhea, and this is also known as paradoxical rhinorrhea. Simple. Now see this picture. There is injury to blood vessels, okay, and because of that there is collection of blood. If the tympanic membrane is intact, there is collection of blood beneath the tympanic membrane, and this is known as, can you see, it looks like this. This is known as hemotympanum. Hemotympanum. Second, what happens? There is characteristic sign in middle cranial fossa fracture, and that is post-auricular ecchymosis here. So there is post-auricular ecchymosis or ecchymosis over which process? Mastoid process, and the other name of this condition is Battle sign. Clear? So if you see this picture, you can notice here that there is CSF otorrhea. So here CSF is coming out if the tympanic membrane is ruptured. Because of bleeding in these patients, if there is bleeding and this blood is collected, blood behind tympanic membrane. So collection of blood behind tympanic membrane, this is known as hemotympanum. And whenever there is post-auricular ecchymosis or over the mastoid process, there is ecchymosis. So you can see this. So this is known as what? Battle sign, right? So another important point, in middle cranial fossa fracture, there is hemotympanum, collection of blood beneath tympanic membrane, and there is battle sign. Right, now see, in relation to Peters part of temporal bone, two nerves are related, 7th and 8th. So whenever there is fracture of Peters part of temporal bone, which nerves are injured? 7th and 8th. So injury of, so they can be injury of 7th and 8th cranial nerve. Clear? So these are the manifestations. So we are going to repeat again. There is temporal lobe contusion. There can be CSF otorrhea or otorhinorrhea. There can be hemotympanum, and these patients are having battle sign. There can be injury of 7th and 8th cranial nerve in middle cranial fossa fracture. Now see the diagram again. So this posterior fossa is mainly formed by occipital bone. So what happens? In posterior cranial fossa fracture, there is occipital lobe contusion. There is occipital lobe contusion. Clear? Since occipital lobe is involved with vision, so what abnormalities are seen? Visual abnormalities are seen in posterior cranial fossa fracture. So second problem, these patients have visual abnormalities. Clear? These patients have sixth cranial nerve injury, and we discussed that this is the jugular foramen, and the posterior part of jugular foramen is formed by occipital bone, and that's why there are injury to the nerves which passes via jugular foramen, 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerve, and this is known as jugular foramen syndrome, also known as Wernicke syndrome. So what is the other problem? These patients have jugular foramen syndrome. It is also known as Wernicke syndrome. Clear? And in this there is paresis of 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerve. There is paresis of 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerve, and sometimes there is injury to which artery? Basilar artery. So this is also associated with basilar artery injury. Clear? So these are the important points related to posterior cranial fossa fracture. If you have seen AIIMS paper, from last 3-4 years they started asking NICE guidelines in relation to head injury. So what is the full form of NICE? It's the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. So NICE guidelines, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Okay. So first question, NICE guidelines for frequency of neurological examination in head injury patients. Right? So we have to perform neurological observation half-hourly basis until GCS becomes 15. Right? Now suppose the GCS is 15. So now the GCS becomes 15. So if GCS is 15, so what should be the frequency of neurological observations? So if GCS is 15, the minimum frequency of observation for first 2 hours, it should be done every half hourly, and for next 4 hours, it should be done every hourly. Okay? So for first 2 hours, every half hour, and for next 4 hours, every hour. Okay? So the total is 6 hours. Now here you can see, after 6 hours, it should be done every 2 hours, right? So this is important point related to frequency of neurological observations. Second question is NICE guidelines for indications of CT in head injury patients. So in head injury, sometimes we have to perform the CT within 1 hour and sometimes within 8 hours. So see the indications. NICE guidelines for indications of CT. So see the indications of CT within 1 hour and within 8 hours. So within 1 hour and within 8 hours. So if GCS is less than 13 at any point of time, we have to perform CT within 1 hour. And after 2 hours, if GCS is less than 15, we have to go for CT. Clear? So first, if the GCS is less than 13 at any point, or GCS is less than 15 at 2 hours. Clear? If the patient is having focal neurological deficit, in that case also we have to go. And sometimes the patients are having suspected. So if there is suspected open, depressed, or basal skull fracture. So open, depressed or basal skull fracture. In that case also you are supposed to go for the CT within 1 hour. If the patient is having more than one episode of vomiting, and patient is having post-traumatic seizure. So patient had post-traumatic seizure. Right? So these are 6 indications you have to remember. This was asked many times. Now see the indications of CT within 8 hours. So if the age of patient is it's more than 65 years. If patient is having coagulopathy, so you will notice that certain patients are receiving anticoagulants or antiplatelets, like patient is taking aspirin, warfarin, rivaroxaban. So in those patients also we have to go for CT. Patient gives or relatives gives the history. And what kind of history? There is dangerous mechanism of injury. Right? So suppose their history of fall from height or history of road traffic accident. So this is the dangerous mechanism. We have to go for CT. And if patient is having retrograde amnesia, duration more than 30 minutes. So if there is retrograde amnesia, history of retrograde amnesia for more than 30 minutes, these are the indications. So there are 6 indications for CT within 1 hour and 4 indications for CT within 8 hours. You have to remember. Now we are going to discuss brain injury. And brain injury is further divided into primary brain injury and secondary brain injury. See what is primary, what is secondary. Suppose you are going to hit somebody and because of this traumatic insult, there is neural damage. So there is neural damage directly because of traumatic insult. This is primary. Because of this brain injury, what happens? There is raised intracranial tension or patient is going to develop hypotension or hypoxia. So secondary brain injury occurs after some time of injury and it is preventable. It is because of increased intracranial tension, hypoxia and hypotension. So these are the differences. So see what's primary and what's secondary. So in primary brain injury, the neural damage is directly to the neural damage. It's directly because of traumatic insult. So this is directly because of traumatic insult. Okay, so after trauma, sometimes patient is having contusion, sometimes patient is having laceration, diffuse axonal injuries. So all these are included in primary. So what are the examples? So here it can lead to shearing of neuronal axons, they can be contusion, they can be laceration of brain tissue, clear, and diffuse axonal injuries, right? The secondary occurs after some time and it's preventable. So generally it occurs after some time and this is preventable. Okay, so what are the causes of this secondary brain injury? So in these patients, what are the causes? So these patients are sometimes having hypoxia, patients are having hypotension, there is increased intracranial tension, sometimes there is decreased cerebral perfusion pressure, or patients who are having pyrexia. In these cases also there is increased risk of secondary brain injury, right? So decreased cerebral perfusion pressure and pyrexia. Now see what are the types of brain injuries. So types, first is concussion. Okay, so what is this concussion? After non-penetrating trauma, there is temporary neuronal dysfunction. So there is temporary neuronal dysfunction after non-penetrating trauma. Here NCCT is normal and whatever the deficit is there, it is going to resolve over minutes to hours. So that is concussion. The second is contusion. What is the literal meaning of contusion? Contusion means collection of blood outside the blood vessel. So you have heard that there is skin contusion, lung contusion, cerebral contusion. Contusion is also known as bruises. So what is contusion? Collection of blood outside the blood vessel. Okay. Third is epidural or extradural hematoma. So since this is epidural or extradural hematoma, so here you notice that there is collection of blood between skull and dura. So there is collection of blood between skull and dura. There is subdural hematoma. and there is collection of blood between dura and arachnoid. So there is subarachnoid hemorrhage also and diffuse axonal injuries. So these are the types of brain injury. One by one we are going to discuss. So first, concussion. This is temporary neuronal dysfunction. Temporary neuronal dysfunction following non-penetrating trauma. And here, whatever the deficit is there, it is going to resolve over minutes to hours. So it resolves within minutes to hours. Okay, and generally NCCT is normal. So here you will not find anything on NCCT. NCCT, this is normal. Okay, so if you see all these 6 conditions, in which other condition NCCT is normal? NCCT is normal in diffuse axonal injuries also. Clear? Now, what is this contusion? So this is also known as bruises. And we discussed there is collection of blood outside the blood vessel. So there can be skin contusion, skin bruises, lung contusion. In brain, it is known as cerebral contusion or cerebral bruises. So generally it is of 2 types. See, suppose a patient is being hit by someone by a rod. So at the site of impact, if there is contusion, this is known as coup contusion. And at other site, usually just opposite to the impact, just opposite to the site of impact, if there is a contusion, that is known as contra-coup contusion. So see, contusion. So cerebral contusion is also known as cerebral bruises. This is also known as cerebral bruises, right? And in this, there is collection of blood outside the blood vessel. See the types. So in this picture, you can see there is coup contusion and contra-coup contusion. So here, this is the site of primary impact. So can you see? In this case, you can see that there is collection of blood outside the blood vessel at the site of impact, and contra-coup away from the site of impact, and generally in majority of cases, can you see, just opposite to the site of impact. So here there is contusion at the site of impact, at the site of impact. Clear? And in contra-coup contusion, what happens? There is contusion away from site of impact. Clear? So generally it is just opposite. So here you can see it is just opposite. Now see, what is the most common site of contusion? It is the inferior frontal lobe and temporal lobe. So the most common site is, it is inferior frontal lobe and temporal lobe. How we are going to make the diagnosis? So generally in majority of head injury patients, the investigation of choice for diagnosis is NCCT. Exception is diffuse axonal injuries. In diffuse axonal injuries, you must be knowing what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis, MRI. So here, investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that is NCCT. Clear? See how we are going to manage the contusion. Majority of patients are managed conservatively. But what happens? Certain patients, after some times, they are going to develop mass effect. And if patient is going to develop mass effect, delayed surgical intervention is required, right? So the management, generally conservative management is sufficient. So in majority of patients, conservative management, sometimes, only sometimes, delayed surgical intervention. Clear? So why delayed surgical intervention, and in which patients? The patients who are going to develop the mass effect. So to reduce the mass effect, we go for delayed surgical intervention. So this is how we manage the contusion. Before discussing EDH and STH, I want to tell you some important points related to anatomy. So see first the coverings of brain. Means what are the layers of meninges. Okay, so if you see the layers of meninges, you can see the outermost is dura. So there is dura, then there is arachnoid, and then there is pia. Clear? So between skull and brain there is a pad. Can you see? There is a pad. Innermost is pia, then there is arachnoid, and then there is dura. So these are the layers of meninges. It's very easy to understand. See, suppose this is the skull, and in the skull, this is for your understanding, and in the skull this is the brain, right? If there is collection of blood between skull and dura, so if there is collection of blood between skull and dura, this is known as extradural. And if there is collection of blood between dura and arachnoid, this is subdural, right? So see how it looks like. So this is extradural, also known as EDH, extradural hematoma. And you can see this one, this is the subdural. Clear? So why this extradural hematoma is of red color and this subdural hematoma, this is of blue color? Because EDH is arterial and SDH is venous. So for better understanding, see this diagram. See, there is the weakest point of skull, and that is known as pterion. And pterion is located in which bone? It is located in the temporal bone. So sometimes even a trivial trauma leads to the fracture of this weakest point. And beneath pterion there is one artery which is located. Which one? Middle meningeal artery. So trivial trauma of pterion can lead to injury of middle meningeal artery, and because of this injury there is bleeding, and this blood is collected between skull and dura. Since the blood is collected beneath skull and dura, between skull and dura, here the dura is peeled off. Another important point related to EDH, that it is not going to cross the suture line. Now what is STH? So here you can see that there is skull fracture, right? And because of that there is injury to middle meningeal artery, and you can see that dura is peeled off. So this is dura which is peeled off, and there is collection of blood. What kind of? Arterial blood. So this is extradural or epidural hematoma. Epidural hematoma doesn't cross the suture line. It doesn't cross. Now see the subdural hematoma. Generally in subdural hematoma, head injury is more severe. So here there is significant trauma. Because of this significant trauma, what is the problem? There is injury to the cortical veins or imagery veins. So bridging veins or cortical veins. So whenever there is injury to bridging vein or cortical veins, what happens? There is collection of venous blood, and this venous blood is collected between dura and arachnoid. Can you see? So this is dura and this is arachnoid. Clear? So here dura is intact, but SDH is going to cross the suture line. It is going to cross the suture line. Now see another landmark. This is the pterion, and generally it is located in which bone? It's a part of temporal bone. But if you notice this point, pterion, here there is convergence of sutures of which bone? Can you see here? There is convergence of sutures of frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone, and here sphenoid bone. Can you see? This is the middle meningeal artery, right? This is the posterior division and this is anterior division. So generally this anterior division is in close proximity of the pterion. Okay, so let's discuss the differences. EDH and STH. Okay, so extradural hematoma. So here collection of blood between skull and dura. And since collection of blood is there between skull and dura, so here dura is peeled off. Dura is peeled off, and it doesn't cross suture line. Doesn't cross suture line. Simple. SDH, subdural hematoma. So here there is collection of blood between dura and arachnoid. Simple. And that's why here the dura is intact. Dura is intact, but it crosses suture line. Crosses suture line. Okay. Now see the trauma. In EDH, there is trivial trauma, even trivial trauma, non-significant trauma, over which point? The weakest point of skull, and that is pterion. It's the part of which bone? It's the part of temporal bone. temporal bone. So injury or fracture of pterion can lead to injury to middle meningeal artery, and because of this middle meningeal artery injury, there is collection of arterial blood. So this occurs in EDH. Now what happens in EDH? Lucid interval is positive. What is lucid interval? This question was asked many times. So there is a short period of consciousness between two episodes of unconsciousness. So in this case, important point here, lucid interval, it's positive. Now see the STH. Further definitions are asked, that what is acute STH, what is subacute STH, and what is chronic STH. So see the definition. Acute STH. Okay, so whenever the duration is less than 3 days. What is subacute STH? So here the duration is 4 to 21 days. And what is the chronic STH? This is the question which is asked. So whenever the duration is more than 21 days, and sometimes they ask in weeks. Clear? So chronic STH, when the duration of STH is more than 21 days or it's more than 3 weeks. Now this STH is more common in elderly. Okay, so see the problem. STH, this is more common in elderly, and here it is caused by significant trauma. So because of this significant trauma, this is the question which you have to remember. There is injury to which vein? Cortical veins or bridging veins. Means what kind of blood is collected? Here there is venous blood which is collected. So here dura is intact and it is going to cross the suture line. Okay, now how we are going to make the diagnosis? Investigation of choice for diagnosis is NCCT. So we go for NCCT head. Now on NCCT head, what you can see in the first picture here, you can see that there is hyperdense lesion, and can you see what is the shape? It is biconvex or lenticular shaped. Clear? And if you see the second one, can you see here, this is concavo-convex hyperdense lesion. So here there is concavo-convex hyperdense lesion, right? Now how we are going to manage the EDH and STH? In EDH, since there is collection of blood, we have to drain it. So how we can drain? We can create burr hole. So by creating or making burr hole, we can drain it, and sometimes we need craniotomy. In cases of STH, if small STH is there, we can manage it conservatively. But if large STH is there, it has to be drained by craniotomy. Okay. Once in AIIMS, this question was asked that there is a patient of head injury who fell unconscious, and you have to create a burr hole because you suspect that there is some kind of hematoma. So where you are going to create the burr hole, right? Generally, the burr hole should be created close to the pterion. On which side? On the side of hematoma. So if a patient is having hematoma and NCCT is available, so you know on which side hematoma is there. So very close to pterion, you are supposed to create a burr hole. So we discussed the relation of pterion. So you can see again what is the location of this pterion. It is located at convergence of frontal, parietal, temporal and sphenoid bone sutures, right? So here we are going to create the burr hole. Sometimes NCCT is not available, right? And on the basis of suspicion only, you have to create the burr hole. So how you are going to create the burr hole? Look for the pupils. So the side on which pupil is dilated, if CT is not available, you will create the burr hole close to the pterion. Okay, so how we create the burr hole? Two important principles. So first, burr hole should be created on the side of hematoma, on the side of hematoma, and where exactly? Close to pterion, close to pterion. Simple. And if CT facility is not available, NCCT is not available, then it should be performed close to pterion on which side? On the side of dilated pupil. So on the side of dilated pupil. Simple. Now we are going to discuss subarachnoid hemorrhage. Subarachnoid hemorrhage is asked both in medicine and surgery. So first important point, that what is the most common cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and the most common cause is trauma, followed by spontaneous rupture of Berry aneurysm. Okay, subarachnoid hemorrhage is a favorite topic of AIIMS people. Sometimes they give you the question in radiology, and most of the times they are going to ask the question in medicine and surgery related to clinical findings. Now see, these patients have sudden transient loss of consciousness. What? Transient loss of consciousness, and there is severe excruciating headache. And if you are going to ask the patient what kind of headache, patient is going to describe that, sir, this was the worst headache of my life. If you see the focal neurological deficit, these patients have neck stiffness also, these patients have vomiting also. So see the clinical features of subarachnoid hemorrhage. There is sudden transient loss of consciousness and presence of excruciating headache, right? And in the question there is a pointer which is given. What? That patient is going to describe this headache as worst headache of life. Neck stiffness also, vomiting also. So there is neck stiffness, there is vomiting. But see, focal neurological deficits, this is uncommon. Okay, so whenever you are getting this question, there are two pointers which are generally mentioned in the question. First pointer is there was no focal neurological deficit, and the second pointer is that there was excruciating headache, and patient is going to describe this headache as worst headache of my life. Now see, what are the hallmarks of subarachnoid hemorrhage caused by aneurysmal rupture? Okay, so if there is aneurysmal rupture, what are the hallmarks of subarachnoid hemorrhage caused by aneurysmal rupture? So these patients have sudden onset headache in absence of focal neurological deficit. So there is no focal neurological deficit, and there is xanthochromic spinal fluid. Xanthochromic spinal fluid means there is blood in CSF. Okay, so first there is sudden headache, it means there is blood in CSF. Again, what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis? It is NCCT head, and most of the patients of subarachnoid hemorrhage are managed conservatively, right? So diagnosis, investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that's NCCT, and the management is the conservative management. So another type of injury which is asked almost every year, and that is diffuse axonal injury. Okay, now what is the problem in this case? See, after severe head injury, what happens? There is diffuse means there is widespread. Axonal injuries means axonal damage. So the term is self-explanatory. There is widespread axonal damage involving both cerebral hemispheres, and generally it is going to occur after severe head injury. Now see, what kind of strain is responsible for causing diffuse axonal injury? Suppose you are going or traveling by a car, and this car is being hit by a truck. So what happens? There is sudden acceleration or deceleration. So because of this sudden acceleration or deceleration strain, and sometimes because of angular strain, there is shearing stress. And because of this shearing stress or force, what happens? There is widespread axonal damage, right? So what happens here? There is widespread axonal damage involving both cerebral hemispheres. Clear? And generally it is seen after severe head injury, right? And generally, what's the cause? It is because of application of, so whenever there is application of acceleration, deceleration strain or angular strain. Clear? Because of this acceleration or deceleration strain or angular strain, what happens? There is shearing force, right? So because of this shearing force, there is widespread axonal damage leading to diffuse axonal injury. Now, question, what is the most common site of diffuse axonal injury? So it is lobar white matter. Exactly where? At the junction of white matter and gray matter. So the most common site, it's the lobar white matter. Okay, exactly at the junction of gray matter and white matter, followed by corpus callosum. Okay, followed by brainstem. Now see the presentation. Whenever these patients are brought to your emergency, these patients are in unconscious state. So there is loss of consciousness, and you must be knowing that diffuse axonal injury is the most common cause of post-traumatic vegetative state. In these patients, intracranial tension can be normal, it can be raised. And if we are sending the patient for NCCT, in majority of cases, generally you are going to find normal NCCT. So how you are going to make the diagnosis of diffuse axonal injuries? The diagnosis is made by MRI. Okay, so see the clinical features. At the time of presentation, these patients have loss of consciousness, so patient is in unconscious state, and you must be knowing that diffuse axonal injury is the most common cause of post-traumatic vegetative state. Post-traumatic vegetative state. Simple. And we discussed that intracranial tension, it can be normal or it can be raised. Now see the diagnosis. Here NCCT is usually normal, and that's why investigation of choice for diagnosis so investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that is MRI. Clear? Now if you see the prognosis of diffuse axonal injury is extremely poor. So it is associated with extremely poor prognosis. Now we are going to discuss the management of raised intracranial tension. But before discussing the management, we should discuss first the physiological aspect. Okay, so you must be knowing that brain, it is dependent on the continuous perfusion. Why brain requires continuous perfusion? For oxygen and glucose supply. So for brain there should be continuous perfusion. Okay, why? So that it is going to receive oxygen and glucose supply. Clear? So here, what is the normal cerebral blood flow? Continuous perfusion. So here there should be cerebral blood flow. So how much is the normal cerebral blood flow? The normal cerebral blood flow is 55 ml per minute for, it is 55 ml per minute for 100 grams of brain tissue. So the normal cerebral blood flow is 55 ml per minute every 100 gram of brain tissue. Okay, now this cerebral blood flow is dependent on cerebral perfusion pressure. Okay, so this is dependent on cerebral perfusion pressure. And what is the formula for cerebral perfusion pressure? It is equal to mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure. Okay, so cerebral perfusion pressure is equal to mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure. Now see what are the normal values. If you see the mean arterial pressure, the normal value is 90 to 110 mmHg. Okay, and how much is the normal value of intracranial pressure? This is 5 to 15 mmHg. So what is the normal value of cerebral perfusion pressure? This is 75 to 105 mmHg. All these values are in mmHg. This is the normal value. Now the problem. After head injury, we discussed that in certain patients there is increased intracranial pressure. And if there is increased intracranial pressure, what will happen? There is decreased cerebral perfusion pressure. And if there is decreased cerebral perfusion pressure, so what will happen? There is decreased cerebral blood flow. So what are the problems here? Since there is decreased cerebral perfusion pressure, it is going to decrease the cerebral blood flow, and because of this, patient will be having ischemia. And we discussed that there are two types of brain injury. One is primary and one is secondary. Primary is because of direct traumatic insult, and secondary is because of intracranial tension, raised intracranial tension, hypoxia. So what will happen? This will lead to secondary brain injury. Simple. So we have to avoid this secondary brain injury. So we have to improve the cerebral blood flow. And if you have to improve or increase the cerebral blood flow, so you have to increase the cerebral perfusion pressure. It means if any patient in whom this intracranial pressure is increased, so you can decrease the intracranial pressure. So how we can decrease? Either you insert the ventriculostomy so that you are going to drain the CSF and intracranial pressure is decreased. In certain patients, we go for osmotherapy where we use mannitol or 3% saline, that is hypertonic saline. So how we can decrease the intracranial pressure? With the help of either ventriculostomy, so we can go for ventriculostomy, or osmotherapy. Simple. Okay. Now see, there is rigid cranium, right? So here you cannot do anything because the cranium is rigid. So what we can do, if we are going to increase the mean arterial pressure, indirectly it is going to increase the cerebral perfusion pressure and cerebral blood flow. So how you can increase this mean arterial pressure? Yes, so we can use dopamine, norepinephrine, so pressure therapy. So with the help of pressure therapy, we can increase the mean arterial pressure, which indirectly increases the cerebral blood flow. So this is the basic pathophysiology. Now see, some patients have uncontrolled increased intracranial tension. And if there is uncontrolled increased intracranial tension, in these patients there is either cerebral herniation or there is cerebellar tonsillar herniation. Okay, so problem, cerebellar tonsillar herniation, and you must be knowing this, there is tonsillar herniation through foramen magnum. Okay, so cerebellar tonsillar herniation. Right, through foramen magnum. Simple. So because of this cerebellar tonsillar herniation, there is compression of medullary vasomotor and respiratory center. So if there is, it leads to compression of medullary vasomotor center and respiratory center. Clear? So because of compression of these centers, it can lead to Cushing triad. So because of this compression, it can lead to Cushing triad. Okay, and this question is frequently asked in exam. What are the components of Cushing triad? So these patients have hypertension, bradycardia and irregular respiration. Okay, so the components, these patients have hypertension, patients have bradycardia and irregular respiration. So if you understand the pathophysiology, it's very easy for you to understand the management. And answer is, suppose we are going to manage a patient who is having raised intracranial tension, the correct option is dependent on the pathophysiology. Now imagine a situation where patient is having raised intracranial tension because of subarachnoid hemorrhage. In subarachnoid hemorrhage, there is impaired drainage. So how you can improve the drainage? You can improve the CSF drainage via ventriculostomy. So if a patient is there with subarachnoid hemorrhage leading to increased intracranial tension, ventriculostomy is preferred. Now see the second situation. If a patient is having head injury or stroke, in head injury or stroke there is cytotoxic edema. And for this cytotoxic edema, what is the preferred option? We should go for osmotherapy by using mannitol or 3% saline. That's hypotonic saline. So read the question carefully, see that what is the underlying condition, and depending upon that, answer is going to vary. So we are going to discuss the stepwise management approach. Stepwise management approach for the patients having increased intracranial tension. So we are going to discuss the stepwise management approach for the patients having increased intracranial tension. And see, we are going to discuss this management from latest edition of Harrison, and that's 20th edition. Okay, so see the management approach, stepwise management approach for the patients having raised intracranial tension. Okay, so first we are supposed to insert the ICP monitor, and what are the two options? Either we can go for ventriculostomy or we can insert intraparenchymal ICP monitor. Out of ventriculostomy for ICP monitor, which one is preferred? Two options. We have ventriculostomy, where we are going to insert the catheter in the lateral ventricle, or we can insert the intraparenchymal ICP monitor. Which one is preferred? Ventriculostomy is preferred. Why? Because it is going to allow the CSF drainage. So what? This ventriculostomy is preferred. Why? Because it allows the CSF drainage. But there are certain situations where this should not be done. What? Ventriculostomy. Imagine a patient is having diffuse edema and there is a small ventricle. So patient is having diffuse edema with small ventricle. And second, certain patients who are having coagulopathy, in these cases ventriculostomy is avoided. So in these cases, what we insert? The ICP monitor. So in which cases ICP monitor is inserted? First, patients having diffuse edema with small ventricles. Okay, and the second, patients who are having coagulopathy, because if you go for ventriculostomy, it increases the risk of bleeding. Now see, what are the goals of treatment? We have to decrease the intracranial tension, and the intracranial pressure should be less than 20 mmHg, and the cerebral perfusion pressure should be more than equal to 60 mmHg. Okay, so what are the goals of treatment? For more than 5 minutes, any patient having intracranial pressure more than 20 to 25 mmHg for more than 5 minutes, active management is required. So see how we are going to manage. Any patient in whom the intracranial pressure is more than 20 to 25 mmHg for more than 5 minutes. Clear? So in these patients, active management is done. Okay, so see what are the steps of active management. First, you have to elevate the head end of bed. So elevate the head end of bed. Okay, there are two positions. One is known as Trendelenburg and second is known as reverse Trendelenburg. In OT you have seen head low position. So suppose it's a patient, head low position is Trendelenburg and head up position is reverse Trendelenburg. So what is the name of this position? This is reverse Trendelenburg position. Okay, reverse Trendelenburg position, right? Second step is drain the CSF. So ventriculostomy is already in the place. We discussed that there is ventriculostomy or if there is ICP monitor. So if ventriculostomy is already there, we have to drain the CSF. So we drain the CSF generally via ventriculostomy. if it's already in the place. Clear? Otherwise, we go for osmotherapy. Third option is osmotherapy. And we discussed that the patients who are having stroke, patients who are having head injury, they have cytotoxic edema. So in these patients, what is preferred? Osmotherapy. And in osmotherapy, what are the agents we use? We use mannitol and we use 3% saline, and that's hypertonic saline. Clear? With mannitol, you have to be careful. Why? Because you have to maintain the serum osmolality less than 320 milliosmol. So if you use mannitol here, the serum osmolality should be maintained below 320 milliosmoles. You have to remember the value. We have option of giving glucocorticoids, and in glucocorticoids, which agent we give? Generally we give dexamethasone. Now, in which patients we give dexamethasone? You see, the patients who are having brain tumor, the patients who are having brain abscess, they have vasogenic edema. So generally in these patients, dexamethasone is used. So fourth option is we give glucocorticoids, and the preferred agent is dexamethasone, and it is basically used in the patients who are having vasogenic edema. Clear? And which patients have this vasogenic edema? The patients having brain tumor or the patients who are having brain abscess. Clear? But the problem, if the patient is having head injury, ischemic stroke or hemorrhagic stroke, you should avoid glucocorticoids. So important point, avoid. Fifth step is sedation. And for sedation, which agents are used? Here we use morphine, propofol, midazolam. So for sedation, we use morphine, propofol, and midazolam. Okay. Now see, if required, we can go for neuromuscular paralysis also. But whenever we go for neuromuscular paralysis, we have to go for endotracheal intubation. So you have to intubate the patient because there is neuromuscular paralysis. What is the advantage of this endotracheal intubation? That you are going to control the respiratory rate. And if we control the respiratory rate, we can go for elective hyperventilation. And what is the advantage of this hyperventilation? That it is going to wash out the CO2. So there is another option here that we can go for neuromuscular paralysis. Clear? If required. But in these cases, we should go for endotracheal intubation. And what is the advantage of this endotracheal intubation? That it can be used for elective hyperventilation. And because of this hyperventilation, we can wash out the CO2. But this elective hyperventilation is used only for short period of time. So elective hyperventilation, this is used for short period only. Clear? So what's the other option available for us? We discussed is the hyperventilation, and we discussed that hyperventilation should be used only for short period of time. And in pressure therapy, what are the agents which are used which can increase the mean arterial pressure? So pressure therapy, to increase the mean arterial pressure. So what are the agents we use? We use phenylephrine, dopamine, norepinephrine. Phenylephrine, dopamine, and norepinephrine. Okay, see the formula again. We discussed that cerebral perfusion pressure is equal to mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure. We tried to decrease intracranial pressure initially. If it's not possible, increase the mean arterial pressure. So cerebral perfusion pressure will be increased, and these agents are going to increase the mean arterial pressure. So this is how we are going to manage the patients who are having raised ICT value more than 20 to 25 mmHg for more than 5 minutes. Now how to remember? It's very easy to remember. There is a mnemonic, and the mnemonic is elevated dogs hyperventilate pressure. Elevated dogs hyperventilate pressure. Okay, so see the mnemonic. Elevated, this is D, this is O, this is G, S. So elevated dogs hyperventilate pressure. Clear? So elevated means you have to elevate the head end of bed. D means we have to go for drainage of CSF. O means osmotherapy. G, use the glucocorticoids and the agent uses dexamethasone. S, we can go for sedation. Hyperventilate means hyperventilation, and pressure means use of pressure therapy. There are second tier therapies also for raised intracranial tension. So what are those second tier therapies used? Okay, so first option is we can go for decompressive craniectomy. Because cranium is rigid, so we can go for decompressive craniectomy. Okay, what is the second option? We can give high dose barbiturate therapy, and this is also known as pentobarbital coma. Second option is high dose barbiturate therapy. Barbiturate therapy, and the other name is pentobarbital coma. Pentobarbital coma. Clear? Now see how it works. So this barbiturate, it is going to decrease the neuronal metabolism, and if there is decreased neuronal metabolism, it is going to increase the longevity of neurons. So what happens? It is going to increase the longevity of neurons. Okay, see, even by creating hypothermia, we can decrease the neuronal metabolism, and by decreasing the metabolism, we can increase the longevity. So what is the third option? Hypothermia. So we have to decrease the body temperature from 37 degrees centigrade to 33 degrees centigrade. Clear? So decrease the body temperature from 37 to 33, and the action is almost same. It is going to decrease the neuronal metabolism, and which is going to increase the longevity of neurons. So this is how we manage the patients who are having raised intracranial tension. So this is all about head injury.